book lovers. It is G-Swizz here, and I'm here today to talk about all the series that I completed in 2022. I love filming this video every year because I feel like I have bragging rights. It's always a big achievement when you complete a series. However, the fact that I completed 35 series this year, technically 36 because I reread an entire trilogy as well as reading it for the first time, that's incredible. It's such an achievement. There were more series that I did want to get to. Obviously, the limitations of like the year being a year and my work schedule, it is understandable that I didn't get to as many as I wanted to. However, if we're talking about the actual number, that's a good achievement. It is almost identical to my 2021 reading year because I'm pretty sure I also read 35 series. Without further ado, let's get straight into the series I read in 2022, and I will give you my star rating on them and what I thought about them very briefly. By the way, if I'm looking down here, it's because I'm looking at my Excel spreadsheet. The first series I completed in 2022 was Weathering With You. This was a manga series that consisted of 3 volumes, and I gave this series a 4 stars. This manga series I actually read in the library. I wanted to borrow it, but instead I pretty much sat in the library and I read it back to back. And what I can say is it was a very entertaining series. I'm really happy I read the manga before I watched the movie because it helped me anticipate a pretty dense movie, because it is a pretty dense movie. It does take a while. I think it's a 2.5 hour movie. If it wasn't, I do remember that the movie was on the longer side of things. Reading the manga series beforehand at my own pace and then going into the movie, I feel like it helped me stay engaged. I've heard that not many people prefer Weathering With You over Your Name. I am planning on reading Your Name eventually and also watching the movie to Your Name as well, but I wanted to read and then watch Weathering With You first because I hear it's not as good. And the next manga series I ended up starting and finishing as well was also a manga series I read from the library, and that was Ruby. I gave this one a 3 stars. I think I would have been more invested in the manga if I was invested in the series via another media. I might revisit Ruby eventually, but I don't feel like doing so at the moment. And the next book series I completed in 2022 was the Layla trilogy by Tessandra Odette. This series is now being rewritten. So the original Layla trilogy, I believe, has gone out of print now. It's pretty hard to find the original trilogy if you are wanting to read the way that Tessandra Odette originally wrote this series. She's currently re-releasing these books, writing new passages in them and deleting some out of the current trilogy. So I am very much curious and I am looking forward to reading the series in the new format, but at the moment I really appreciate the original Layla trilogy. According to my spreadsheet, I gave the series a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I preferred Cora's perspective in the series. There was a princess in the series who I felt, yes, they were kind of redeemable, but they were very bratty to begin with, and so it was really difficult to like them from the very beginning. I feel like they made a lot of mistakes. However, I am very much curious about Tessandra Odette's new take on their character, whether anything has changed or whether they continue to be spoiled or bratty. I think that's the reason why I ducked the rating down a little bit, but I overall very much enjoyed this series, and I cannot believe that that was the first thing I read from Tessandra Odette. As much as I enjoyed the Layla trilogy, there's more to come. And the next book series I ended up completing in 2022 was the Bellinger Sisters Duology by Tessandra Odette. I really can't believe I just called Tessa Bailey Tessandra Odette. What kind of mix-up is that? I ended up giving this one a 4.25 out of 5 stars, and I feel like this is an unpopular opinion, but I much preferred It Happened One Summer over Hook, Line, and Sinker. But the weird thing is, I feel like I relate more to Hannah Bellinger, who is the protagonist of Hook, Line, and Sinker, but I prefer Piper Bellinger's story over Hannah Bellinger's story. I think it's the romantic dynamic I prefer in It Happened One Summer, and I know to some people It Happened One Summer is kind of ridiculous and unbelievable, but I prefer it, and I think I prefer it because I kind of like the wacky nature about it. And It Happened One Summer is essentially the contemporary that kicked off my romance contemporary loving kick. Now I am obsessed, and now I have shelves full of contemporary novels. And I think it's all thanks to Tessa Bailey. And speaking of Tessa Bailey, the next series I ended up completing in 2022 was the Hot and Hammered trilogy by Tessa Bailey. Now, Fix Her Up is not the best romance novel. If this was a standalone romance novel without companion series, series, I'd have to say it'd kind of be trash. I liked the story, I liked the plot, however, I don't like how the story ended up because it feels like 50 pages were lost from this book. Travis's character development was completely lost from this book, and he made a decision that just seems very out of character for him, in my personal opinion. It just doesn't make sense for the story. However, Love Her or Lose Her and Tools of Engagement redeemed the series for me. Those two are top tier romance novels in my opinion. Love Her or Lose Her I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. Tools of Engagement I gave a 4.5, but Fix Her Up I gave a 3. I'd have to say overall this series gets a 4 stars from me. I still put it on my favorites list because I think out of all of Tessa Bailey's books slash series, this series would have to be the most memorable for me. I was so obsessed with the series to the point that I read all 3 books within either 24 or 48 hours. I definitely recommend it to anyone who's wanting a good start in romance contemporary. Oh my goodness, I forgot I even read this trilogy. The Generations trilogy by Scott Siegler. I gave this trilogy a 3.5 out of 5 stars because while it was a very fascinating concept and very unique, it still read very young. And what I don't like about this book series in particular, oh my goodness, I am so tired of when a bunch of guys are obsessed with the female protagonist for no particular reason. Wednesday also has this trope. I love Wednesday on Netflix. However, I don't understand why the two love interests are love interests pining over her that much to begin with anyway. But if you don't like that in Wednesday, you will definitely hate that in the Generations trilogy. Also, I felt like the first book, there was a little bit of cringe because the characters start off having childlike minds. It's not necessarily a spoiler as that's how the series kind of starts off. However, they start to mature as the series goes on, and I do appreciate that. There was just a lot that I didn't love about it. However, I did find it very fascinating. I kind of expected it to be like the next Divergent, but it's definitely not whatsoever. I still kind of recommend it for those who are looking for a good young adult dystopian. I did not love Alive that much. I found Alight and Alone, however, to be very fascinating. And another book series I forgot I completed this year because it's been a while. The Star-Touched Queen duology by Roshani Chokshi. This is interesting because I wouldn't say that it ended off the same way as the Gilded Wolves. However, a lot of people keep on saying A Crown of Wishes is better than the Star-Touched Queen, and I heavily disagree. The Star-Touched Queen, the first book, is incredible, and I reckon that if we got more books with the characters in the Star-Touched Queen, I would love that series. I would love that trilogy. I would love that quartet. I could use many books with the characters in Star-Touched Queen. I think I gave Star-Touched Queen like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. However, A Crown of Wishes, I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. I had high expectations for it, and I think it's because a lot of people keep on saying it's better, and I think that unfortunately made me expect a lot from A Crown of Wishes. I think the Hades and Persephone elements of the Star-Touched Queen really made the first book for me. I really appreciated it, and I still think about it. However, A Crown of Wishes, in my personal opinion, is forgettable. And the next book series I ended up completing in 2022 was the Honey and Ice trilogy by Shannon Mayer and Kelly St. Clair. I really enjoyed this trilogy. However, I think the bittersweet thing about this trilogy is that it has opened itself up for a spin-off, and in a way, the trilogy doesn't feel complete. I do love series extensions. However, I kind of wanted a more satisfactory finale. I think that this series had potential to be a 5 out of 5 stars, but because of its open-ended ending, I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I loved the first 2 books and their cliffhangers. However, I feel like the third and final book in the trilogy also kind of had one of those cliffhangers. And I mean, it's not bad to leave something open for a spin-off. It's just, unfortunately, everything felt kind of rushed, and I kind of just wanted more satisfaction in my finale. But that is okay. I'm very much looking forward to continuing on with the spin-off eventually. And then I ended up reading the Lux series by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I've talked about this on my channel previously. I think what devastates me about this is that I expected the Lux series to be one of my new favorite series of all time, probably on par with the Blood and Ash series, but unfortunately the Lux series was not that. It was definitely a guilty pleasure paranormal young adult romance. It was definitely very vanilla. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. And in my personal opinion, I reckon that the series could have been a 4-book series. It could have been a quartet with a prequel, and I reckon that the entire series could have had Damon's perspective. I understand that Jennifer loves writing the books in a single POV and then do POV books for the love interest. That didn't work out in this situation because I believe after the first POV book from Damon, the series didn't end up continuing, and I'm excited for this to happen with Blood and Ash. Blood and Ash spin-off POV books with Hawk's perspective. I know they are going to be successful as opposed to these ones because the Blood and Ash series is so successful right now, so you can guarantee that. However, with the Lux series, I don't know if we're ever gonna get the full POV of Damon for the entire duration, and I really wish we did, because at the times we weren't in his head and things were getting frustrating. I didn't like Damon, and I personally think that that took away from the enjoyment of reading the series initially. Jennifer could have written Damon's perspective into these novels earlier, so we wouldn't really have to worry about an uncompleted series from his perspective. Lux series, I gave like a solid 4 out of 5 stars. I think it could have been a 5 if the series was cut shorter, because I really did enjoy the series, but also I reckon that the series would have been more enjoyable if we got Damon's perspective the entire way through. And in 2022, I also ended up reading the Fair Isle trilogy by Tessandra Odette. I love this trilogy so much. I gave it a 4.75 out of 5 stars. I think at first things were a little bit slow to start off with, but once I got into book 1, everything came into place. It was amazing. I loved Evelyn's story. I loved her character development. Yes, she was unlikable at times, but oh boy, I would still die for her. I love her. I love Aspen. I love the entire crew. I love this world, and I love that the Fair Isle trilogy set up this incredible fantasy world for the romance novels that Tessandra Odette continually writes. Cannot wait to read more in this world. I love the series and will continually recommend it. And speaking of book series that I will continually recommend, the book series that I read and reread in the year of 2022 is the Bargainer trilogy by Laura Thalassa. I love this trilogy so much, as you guys may have heard based on my top 22 books and series of 2022. It ended up being my favorite. I love this world. I love these characters. Desmond Flynn, Calypso, Temper. I love the lot. I think I'm going to reread the series eventually as well, because the traditionally published editions, while the story isn't different, I think new edits have been made according to Laura Thalassa, but she said you can read the original editions and the new editions and they wouldn't really make too much of a difference. They probably just edited some things, I don't know, grammatically or formatting wise. I wanted to reread it while it was still in its independently published form as well. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to rereading it in its traditionally published form, because I love this trilogy and I think for years to come I will continuously reread it. I would recommend it to absolutely everyone. I have already given someone a recommendation for their 12 friends recommended them 12 books challenge for them to read Rhapsodic. That's how much I love this series, and that's how much I would personally recommend it. I read this series twice this year, so I'm technically allowed to count it as 2 series. I mean, by my rules, okay? By my rules. Oh yeah, and obviously I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I mean, why wouldn't I? It's like one of my favorite trilogies ever. The next series I ended up completing in 2022 was the Wraith King's duology by Grace Draven. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of wanted something similar to the Bargainer trilogy going into the Wraith King's duology. However, I ended up getting something completely opposite. I feel like this romance was too wholesome for this world. Overall, Radiance and Eidolon were just very cute books, and I'm looking forward to reading more from Grace Draven overall. This duology also encouraged me to pick up a standalone by Grace Draven, and Master of Crows ended up being one of my favorite books of 2022 as well. I'm so happy I discovered a new fantasy author through this trilogy, and I cannot wait to read more from them. The next series I ended up completing in 2022 was the Prison Healer trilogy by Lynette Noni. I started this series last year because the Prison Healer came out last year. So did the Gilded Cage. However, I read the Gilded Cage this year, reread the Prison Healer as well in the lead up to the Blood Trader, except I should have read the Gilded Cage 2 months after I initially read it, because I read it 2 months before the Blood Trader, and the cliffhanger got me. The Gilded Cage has probably one of the worst cliffhangers I've ever read in my entire life. I was in tears. I was in pain reading that cliffhanger because it just doesn't feel hopeful. It feels like all hope has been lost. Like, you know that there is a final book, so things are probably going to resolve itself eventually, but the Gilded Cage kind of made that feel like it was impossible. I'd have to say I'm very much impressed with the way Lynette Noni wrote this trilogy. It's marvelous, it's magnificent, it's a trilogy I highly recommend to everyone. It's a work of art. I hope that encourages you guys to pick it up, because the Prison Healer trilogy is absolutely phenomenal. And then in 2022, I also read the Charlotte Holmes series by Brittany Cavallaro. I really loved the series. I was so impressed by it, and I know that I had put it off for 4 years, and I should have probably read it earlier. I am kicking myself now because I know that I could have contributed to the hype when it first came out, and I did not. And I am so sorry about that, because no one's talking about it these days. From what I see, not many many people are talking about Brittany Cavallaro's books anymore, really. I'm so excited for Manifest, which is the sequel to Muse. That is probably one of my most anticipated releases of 2023. So I am very much looking forward to reading more by Brittany Cavallaro, but I don't see anyone really talking about the Muse duology or the Charlotte Holmes series anymore. But the Charlotte Holmes series is truly a masterpiece, and if you still do read YA, or if you want to dive into YA again after reading so many other YA series and you don't know if there's anything that's going to be unique or anything that stands out, the Charlotte Holmes series is unlike any series I've ever read before. I thought that the Charlotte Holmes series was going to be a historical romance series. It was definitely not that. I would recommend this to anybody who love mystery shows set in colleges or schools. I kind of wish that Brittany Cavallaro wrote this series as a new adult series, but you can tell that at the time the series came out, new adult wasn't as popular. And so I think Brittany Cavallaro did her best to deal with very dark subject matters under the young adult umbrella, but unfortunately, because the series is marketed as young adult and is marketed to young adult readers, not many people are picking this series up as a result, because it pretty much seems limited to the young adult audience. But let me tell you, it does not necessarily read young. There are darker subject matters, and I reckon that the series could have been marketed toward new adult readers. I think that if it was to be republished and repackaged, I kind of hope that the publisher markets it to new adult readers. And I personally wish that Charlotte and Jamie were aged up a little bit, because while they are young, they go through a lot for teenagers. It's not necessarily unrealistic for teenagers, it's just I reckon the series would be more relatable if the characters in the series were a little bit older. Regardless, I love the series and I definitely recommend it to everyone. And the next book series that I completed in 2022 was the Raybearer duology by Jordan E. Fueco. I actually really enjoyed this duology. I was expecting this duology to have somewhat of a duology problem, and you know what? It kind of does to some degree. As much as the first book is very good and is entertaining, the second book has a separate plot. This all being said, I am pleased with this duology because it doesn't feel rushed at all. I personally think that with series like A Song of Wraiths and Ruin and These Hollow Vows, I feel like with those duologies, they set up a very big premise that could have been explored over a trilogy or a quartet. But with the Raybearer duology, it felt kind of episodic. It felt like one book was about one thing, the other book was about another thing, and both of the stories tied up seamlessly and perfectly, in my personal opinion. And I think that that rubbed a bunch of people the wrong way when it came to Redemptor, because Redemptor felt very different from the first book. However, I prefer a Raybearer over a Song of Wraiths and Ruin or a These Hollow Vows any day, because I am just so happy that this duology was complete in itself. I understand that not everyone likes the different premise of the second book, but I really enjoyed it. And I'm just happy that the series feels complete, because when you get a series that has promise for a very wide story, only for it to be rushed in the second book, in my personal opinion, that is something that I hate about duologies sometimes. They just don't feel complete at the end of the day, and we're just left wanting more. With the Raybearer duology, however, I did not feel like I needed more. And then I read the Bone Witch trilogy by Rin Chepeko, and this was one of those series where I initially felt like it was too long. It was just really slow, hard to get into. But once I got to the halfway point, even though yes, these books are chunky and a lot of the time you don't have to wait until the halfway point to get into a series, but with the Bone Witch trilogy, it was worth it. This series broke my heart. It very much gave me Wanda Maximoff vibes, because the protagonist is essentially on a dark path and you get to see them descend into darkness. It's kind of a powerful read. There's a before and an after timeline. How do I continue talking about this book series without crying? It's a book series that I would recommend to those who are wanting to read about a protagonist who is 100% morally gray. They are going through a lot. This series is really dark, but it is definitely one that I would recommend, and has definitely proven Rin Chepeko as an incredible author to me. I'm so looking forward to reading Silver Under Nightfall by them as well, because The Bone Witch really proved to me that they are an excellent writer. And unfortunately, this series, yeah, it was slow and it was really hard to get into. And initially, I gave up on the Bone Witch trilogy. It took Illumicrate having to put them on sale to convince me that I needed to give this series a second chance. And for that, I say thank you, Illumicrate, because if you didn't, I would have missed out on an incredible trilogy. And the next series I completed in 2022 was the Chainsaw Man Public Safety arc. Where I can, I want to start acknowledging that manga series do come in arcs. As much as I did not complete the Chainsaw Man trilogy in general this year, I did indeed complete an arc. This series kind of felt complete. I wasn't too sure where Tatsuki Fujimoto was going to take the second arc. Now I'm reading the second arc and it has a completely different vibe from the first. It feels kind of like a new series. However, we do have the same protagonist, but we're not always following the protagonist in the second arc, but we will see how things turn out. I would definitely separate the two, even though yes, they are a part of the same series, and Chainsaw Man still definitely does exist in both and will exist in all arcs. The arc definitely feels different, so I'm counting it as a separate series. Arc 1 is completed at volume 11. So it's not like the last volume of the arc also is the first volume of a new arc. I count volumes 1 to 11 as an entire series arc, but also an entire series I read. That's just how I'm gonna do it because it felt like I read an entire series. And in 2022, I also read the Of Goblin King series by Emma Hamm. This was definitely a very cutesy, romantic fairy tale-esque series. The books were very short to begin with. Like, they were kind of like 200 or 250 pages each. This series, I wouldn't say has any books that stand out. However, I really loved the romance throughout the series. Like, none of the books in particular is like one of my favorite books. However, when I think about the series, I think about the wholesomeness of it, and every single book, the protagonist is saving someone. The protagonist is the typical hero, but I love how the typical chosen one hero trope is done. I gave the series a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's nothing necessarily special to me, but I love the romance and I also love the protagonist's journey. And the next series I ended up completing in 2022 was The Consortium Rebellion by Jessie Mihalik. It's a companion sci-fi trilogy that does focus on the romance as well as the sci-fi aspects. It's very much a space opera. And honestly, I thought that we were going to be following the main protagonist from the first book throughout the entire series, and I was so looking forward to it because I absolutely adore the protagonist in the first book. Look, I also love the romance in the second book. It's just the first book I'd have to say is like the superior one. The second one is like almost on par with it, but I also love elements of the second. I love them both. The third one, however, I found Katarina, I think that was what her name was. I found her a little bit kind of annoying, and I feel like she was placed in there kind of to service her. I mean, it's fair, she is the youngest sibling, and I think that she definitely did deserve some recognition. This series, by the way, follows 7 siblings, but we only get stories of like 3 of them. So I kind of wish that we got the romances of the other 4, but you know, that's okay. Like, we'll have to deal. But the third book was just not as great as the first 2 books. The first 2 books, I think I gave like a 4 or 4.5 out of 5 stars for, but the third book I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. I was just not into it. I do like the ending of the last book because it ties everything up and you get to see all the siblings together kind of resolving a conflict. I love the way that the series tied up. However, I didn't really care for the third and final character we were following. I gave this series like a 3.75 out of 5 stars. It was a good series. I just think that it had potential to be great and it just didn't get there. And then I ended up reading the Feminist novellas. These were by Ali Hazelwood. I actually liked the second 2. I did not like the first one. The first one didn't really feel that romantic. The second one, however, I'd have to say was kind of cute, but the miscommunication really did intensify in that one. And the third one, I think, was kind of like the most romantic out of all of them. Out of all these novellas, I had truly discovered that Ali Hazelwood writes about 3 things. At the moment, she writes about small girls, tall boys, and miscommunication issues. And it's just a running theme. After 5 love stories I've read from her, I am just waiting for something that's a little bit more unique than that. Maybe the next couple that she writes about has less communication issues. Maybe the female character is big, and maybe the male character is a short king, because I want short king representation. I love short kings. This novella series, I gave like a 3.5 out of 5 stars, but I might reduce it to 3 because as much as I did enjoy these stories, when I really think about it, none of them stood out to me. I felt lovey-dovey about the third story and I really enjoyed the second story, but now that I look back on it, they're not really memorable except for the fact that they deal with the same tropes that Ali Hazelwood likes to put in all of her romance novels so far. And then I ended up reading the 4 Horsemen series, which without a doubt I loved, I adored. This was my second favorite series of the year. However, I still feel very conflicted about the rating because initially I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I think in terms of my feelings, I could give it a 5 out of 5 stars, but I would have to say in terms of the way that it entertained me and the way that it compelled me versus how I would see the 4 Horsemen as characters slash love interests altogether, I don't know where I would put it. So maybe I would say officially it's about a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Pestilence I felt very conflicted about when I first read it. However, now looking back at Pestilence, I really do love the story of Pestilence, even though yes, there were some red flags there. I mean, there were red flags in all of them. War and Famine were like instantly like 5-star reads for me. I absolutely adored them. However, in terms of Death, I'd have to say, as much as I love the book and I love the conclusion of the entire series, I love how things are wrapped up, the final book, that's what it is. Oh my goodness, I was trying to work out what I would kind of compare the last book in another series to. I was thinking about road trip novels, and I just remembered that Death kind of feels more like a road trip novel because the characters are essentially traveling a lot. I can't spoil anything there, but yeah, it feels like an on-the-road novel that kind of slows the story down a little bit, but I still really enjoyed the story of Death, and I like the character of Death in this series. I just kind of wish that there was more plot specifically in that book that was a little bit more compelling, like famine or like war. I don't condone what the Four Horsemen do because they are the Four Horsemen. They were essentially built to destroy. They were built to be against humanity rather than for humanity. However, this series is essentially a character study of how they would discover the importance of humanity, and that's why I love it so much, as well as it just being a guilty pleasure fave. But I don't condone what they do or who they are to begin with. And the next series I ended up completing in 2022 was the Wicked Villain series. I ended up reading the last 5 novels in this series. It is a 6-book series, but I started the series back in 2021 with Desperate Measures. Now, in terms of the full series, I liked Desperate Measures. I preferred Learned My Lesson. I really liked A Worthy Opponent. I loved the Beast. I hated the Sea Witch, like with a burning passion. In terms of Queen Takes Rose, I think that that was a very kind of wholesome way to end the series. I would continue on reading about these characters, and I hope that one day Katie Robert will continue on with Sabine Valley, because I really want to binge read that series, because some of my favorite characters, not all, but some of my favorite characters were from Sabine Valley, and I just wanted to kind of know what was going on there and to probably have some cameos from the Beast characters. This series, I'd say, had potential to be one of my favorite series of all time, but the Sea Witch absolutely ruined it for me. And the next book series I ended up reading was Chronicles of Ixia. I read the 6-book series this year, and I think it just reminded me that I need to read more long book series because long book series are the best. I gave this book series a 4 out of 5 stars. I think this book series had potential to be one of my favorite series of the year. The problem is the second half of it had one of those tropes where like a character loses their power, and I'm not okay with it because what I loved about the first half of the series was essentially them kind of coming into their power and learning more about it. I understand that this was kind of a good way to continue on with the series. It's just, it made the second half of the series kind of boring and kind of draggy. The characters kind of worried about that too much when I feel like there could have been more explored. I did love the first half of the study series. My favorite book out of all of them is Fire Study. It would have been a 5 stars if I enjoyed the full series, and the second half did not drag because of the one element that I wasn't necessarily okay with. And the next book series I ended up completing in 2022 was the 6 Crimson Cranes duology. The first book instantly became a favorite. However, the next book kind of ruined the duology for me. No, okay, I do like The Dragon's Promise. It just, the second book really felt like a completely different book. It explored the other part of the love triangle, but it just did not have the consistency of the first book. I love the first book and the way that it was written. I love the heartwarming love story in the first book, but the second book just felt inconsistent in terms of its pacing. There were just so many good moments about the first book, and I think it just came down to the plot structure of the first book. I mean, I can't spoil it because the series is kind of tragic. The first book is beautifully tragic. It's such a sad book because the main character goes through a lot. And in the second book, yes, the protagonist also goes through a lot. However, it did not capture the same magic. I gave the second book a 3 stars, but I gave the first book a 5 stars, so that would just average at around 4. The next book series I ended up completing this year was the Stalking Jack the Ripper series. I gave this series a 3.5 stars because as much as I did enjoy books 1 and books 4, 2 and 3, I felt like were really slow and were kind of dragging on the plot, and if anything, I think the series would have been more fascinating if there were more perspectives involved. This book series kind of reminded me why I don't necessarily pick up historical romance to begin with. I understand that historical romance is more focused on tension rather than the touchy-feely because of the idea of scandal. However, it had me a little impatient at times. That's why I'd have to say it's not necessarily for me, someone who prefers instant gratification in terms of their romance. And in my personal opinion, I also think that that comes down to the fact that everyone kept on praising Audrey Rose and Thomas Cresswell like they were some beautiful couple. And yes, they are some beautiful couple. It's just I expected more scenes with them. I'm conflicted about this one, but I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I still very much enjoyed it, and I will revisit it sometime in the future. I loved the first book and I loved the fourth book. Those two books were absolutely incredible. It's just books 2 and 3 did not really do it for me. And speaking of Carrie Maniscalco, I also completed the Kingdom of the Wicked trilogy this year, and I gave this one a 4.75 out of 5 stars. This series is more my cup of tea because no, we're not necessarily waiting on things to be less scandalous. Things are already scandalous to begin with when you are essentially in a series that takes place in the underworld. I love this series so much, and not necessarily because of its scandalous nature. I love the series because of its plot and because of Amelia's journey, and also because of Raph's journey. I feel like we got more of Raph's journey and perspective on it in the third book, and I appreciate that. I love how this series ended. I gave the first book a 4.5 out of 5 stars, but I gave the second two a 5 out of 5 stars, hence why this series altogether is a 4.75 star rating. The next book series I completed in 2022 also starts with Kingdom. That is Kingdom of Sand and Sky. I completed this trilogy this year, and I actually continued on with it because I read The Princess Will Save You 3 times over the last 3 years. I never read The Queen Will Betray You until this year, and then I read The King Will Kill You, which did come out this year. I love the first book without a doubt. First book is always going to be a 5 out of 5 stars for me. I'd have to say overall this trilogy gets a 5 out of 5 stars for me. It is a very bittersweet trilogy for me, and so that's why it was pretty low on the list when I was filming my favorites video. However, I still very much appreciate the series. It's more bittersweet because it's kind of more realistic than any other fantasy political series I've read, but it does send a message. I really appreciate it, and I love Amarande and Luca. I will forever be in love with their romantic dynamic. I just cannot get over them. They hold a very special place in my heart. And then I ended up reading the Diviner series by Libba Bray. Look, I give this series an overall rating of 4 out of 5 stars because as much as 2 out of the 5 books get a 5 out of 5 star rating from me, one of them is a 4.5 out of 5 stars or maybe a 4 stars, and then the final book is without a doubt a 3-star read. I love this quartet. However, it was definitely very bittersweet, and the reason why I ranked it so high was because it was definitely a very memorable series, no matter how bittersweet it got. Oh my goodness. Yeah, then I ended up reading the Caraval series. That was a 2.5 out of 5 stars. It was very mid, in my opinion. I could not help but cringe a lot while reading the first book and the second book and the third book, actually. I think I had moments of cringe throughout the series. It mostly comes down to the way that the series was written. I reckon that the series could have been dual POV the entire way through. I think that the love interest made me cringe a lot, personally. The only character I really cared about in the series was Jax, and that's why I'm planning to read Once Upon a Broken Heart. But yeah, I don't know if it was worth reading Caraval to get there. And then I ended up reading Blood Like Magic by Lizelle Sambury. Blood Like Magic I gave a 5 stars, but Blood Like Fate I ended up giving a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I reckon that comes down to the fact that I finished this series after I finished Caraval. After finishing Caraval, I wanted another series to jump into that I thought I was going to enjoy over Caraval, but honestly, I should not have used the sequel to the series as a rebound because I reckon it took away from the reading experience. I give this book series a rating of 4 stars. I do like this series and I do plan on rereading it in the future because of how entertaining it was. I just shouldn't have used the series as a rebound series after Caraval. And then in 2022, I ended up starting and completing the It Ends With Us duology by Colleen Hoover. And this duology was very impactful to me. I'd say based on feeling, I would give it a 5 out of 5 stars, but I'd say based on writing choices, like there were moments where I was just like, you know, Lily Blooms, Colleen Hoover with the names again. I know. Even when Ryle was introduced, I cringed a lot. You know, there were cringeworthy moments. However, this series, for the most part, was not necessarily written for entertainment purposes. It was more written as a cautionary tale. But yeah, you know, there were little cringeworthy moments. I did duck down a star due to that. However, this series, absolutely incredible, and it's definitely probably my favorite series by Colleen Hoover. I haven't read a series or any book by Colleen Hoover that are as impactful as these 2 books by her. And these are the 2 books that I would probably recommend to anyone if they are planning to read Colleen Hoover, but it is very triggering because it does deal with very tough subject matters. They were very healing to me personally, but you know what? That is a very personal thing, and I don't expect everyone to take this series the same way that I did. And on the more wholesome side of things, the next series I completed in 2022 was the Love and Hate duology by Ella Mays. This consists of To Love Jason Thorne and To Hate Adam Connor. I loved this duology. I reckon it was absolutely cute. I would take more books in this little contemporary universe, but pretty much all the protagonists are swept away by Hollywood A-listers. Personally, I loved this little fictional insight into the movie industry and these actors' lives. I liked the first book, but I loved the second book, and I'm planning to read more from Ella Mays in the future, but I'm pretty sure none of them will follow any movie stars, like this series does. And then I also ended up completing the Spanish Love Deception duology. At the moment, this has not been confirmed to be extended. Even if it was extended, I don't know who else we'd actually follow in this world because there wasn't another side character who was set up, so I'm counting this as a completed duology. I gave the Spanish Love Deception a 4 out of 5 stars, but I gave the American Roommate Experiment a 5 out of 5 stars. I voted for it for the Goodreads Choice Awards, and in my personal opinion, the American Roommate Experiment got snubbed. This was definitely the best romance novel in that category, in my opinion, so I am devastated that it did not win. However, I would still highly recommend it, and just because it did not win the Goodreads Choice Award, it does not mean that it's not good, because it's incredible. And if you did not like the Spanish Love Deception, trust me, the American Roommate Experiment does it so much better. And the second last series I read in the year of 2022 was These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. I wanted to finish this series off before the end of the year because These Twisted Bonds was one of my most anticipated releases of 2022, and unfortunately it did not deliver the way that I wanted it to. Oh my goodness. I was devastated to find out that it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, and that These Hollow Vows also falls under the duology problem I mentioned earlier. However, overall, I'm still very satisfied by the ending of the trilogy. Now, I reckon I would see this story as like a standalone story, even though it was a duology, and I reckon that Lexi Ryan could have done more with the duology, or could have even tried to negotiate the series to be a longer series, because These Hollow Vows had the potential to be longer. I've mentioned this in a video before, I will mention it again. These Hollow Vows had the potential to be the next Iron Fae series, and unfortunately it was cut too short, it was rushed, it could not be that, but it had potential to be. Yeah, no, I definitely want to read more by Lexi Ryan in the future, but it is just really unfortunate that this series did not turn out the way that I was hoping that it would. It did satisfy me overall, but I'm still kind of devastated that this series was not like extended, you know? And the final book series I ended up completing in 2022 was the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden. I had started the series back in 2021, and I got through the first book, and the first book was very magical to me. However, I kept on telling myself maybe I'm going to continue to read them in 2022 and I'll just complete them later, and I had almost completely forgotten the plot of the first book by the time I wanted to reread it. And what I have to say about this trilogy is that it is very magical, and it is very bittersweet, because a lot of religion and politics are involved in this very magical story. As I mentioned with Kingdom of Sand and Sky, it's not necessarily a bad thing that these book series have some realism to them, even though of course they are set in fantasy worlds. There's only so much fan service you can include in a fantasy series, and I reckon that Catherine Arden balanced this series out absolutely perfectly. I personally enjoyed it, and I'm really happy I revisited it because it's a very important series at the end of the day, but also it's very magical, and it made for a good end of the year read. Even though things are really hot here in Sydney, it made me feel like I was in a winter wonderland. The first book was really slow, but once I got to the second book, I really thoroughly enjoyed the series. So I guess that's gonna be it for this video today, book lovers. If you happen to stay to the end of the video, leave me the book stack emoji because I just talked about a lot of series. And if you happen to enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet already. Join the amazing community of book lovers. And also, I have social medias. I'm at GSwizzleBooks on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm also Goodreads. That's www.goodreads.com/gswizzle. And finally, I'm at TikTok. I'm at GSwizzle on TikTok if you want to follow me there for some bookish content. I love you, book lovers, and I will see you later. Peace.
Started out with half and I flipped it in a double. Started out with half and I flipped it in a double.